Welcome to the Dansportstips NFL season preview. I'm looking at the AFC North. It's the final division to look at in the AFC to complete our preview. I'm going to start with the Baltimore Ravens. A lot went wrong for Baltimore last year. They lost a large portion of their offense to injury and also lost a load of their backups to injury as well. Flacco went down with a cruciate ligament at quarterback. Forsett and soon after Lorenzo Taliaferro were gone for the year at running back. Steve Smith and rookie Brashard Perriman went at wide receiver. And in a division with other classy franchises, they were unable to recover. That's the excuses out the way, though it should be pointed out, for example, that with 3 wins through 10 games, the season was already looking pretty lost when Flacco's knee injury happened. The team is getting older. They return a fair number of starters on offense. Flacco will be back at quarterback. Justin Forsett, who was cut for 2 days before re-signing with the Ravens, will be there. Steve Smith returns to health and potentially Brashard Perriman, though that's up in the air, alongside Kamar Aiken, who emerged in their absence last year. And another veteran in Mike Wallace has been added at wide receiver. Lord alone knows why. Ben Watson signed on from New Orleans in the off-season. Another 30-something. He's already lost for this season, leaving the injury-prone group of tight ends that existed in Baltimore prior to his arrival. At the end of the day, this team seems to be, in fact, getting older. And as players get older, their bodies start to feel the wear and tear of an NFL career and break down more often, resulting in their injury problems. That's why we have the NFL draft, to inject youth and talent into rosters, and the Ravens will certainly be hoping that number 6 pick Ronnie Stanley helps their offensive line. They've lost one of the best guards in football in free agency to the Raiders in Osemele, in no small part due to the Joe Flacco contract he signed after the Super Bowl. But the rest of the line is still pretty good, so long as the rookie performs. It looks a positive area for the Ravens this season. The offensive unit looks like Flacco, who has never lived up to the hype after that Super Bowl run that earned him the big contract that is crippling this team, is in fact playing the worst football of his career since. But he's not surrounded with the talent that he had on that team. It's Flacco and a whole lot of average, or a whole lot of old, whichever way you look at it. And that can't be sustained, not in the long term. The defence also continues to get old. Now, I know you don't just replace Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, for example, as those players are uncommon. CJ Mosley's really good at linebacker. And the front 7 plays the run very well. But they were middle of the road last year for sacks, and they aren't getting any younger. There is also a lack of young talent on the pass rush side of the game. The Ravens have added Eric Weddle from San Diego, who's a big-name player, but is now in his 30s and looked like he was starting to decline in San Diego, though maybe, shall we say, he was a little bit lacking in motivation after the contract situation and the way that dragged out last year. But it doesn't help the unit get any younger. Ultimately, are the Ravens as bad as their record last year? No, I don't think they are. They need to retain health because there is a lack of youth and depth on this roster, and they will unquestionably be better than last year. But it is difficult for me to see them rising above a 500 threshold and contending for a playoff spot in the AFC this year, or any future year, until they have a solid draft class to infuse some solid depth and youth into this roster. The Pittsburgh Steelers, well, it must be the start of a new NFL season because Martavis Bryant and Le'Veon Bell are suspended. At the end of the day, this Pittsburgh offense is still a good unit with Roethlisberger at quarterback, Le'Veon Bell when he's not suspended or injured at running back, and Antonio Brown as the lead receiver. Most teams, save every team in the league, would kill for that trio, apart from the propensity that Roethlisberger has to take a few too many hits that do occasionally result in injuries. The offensive line is solid, particularly in the middle, led by Marquise Pouncey, and the offense looks like it will be fine and dandy. When it comes to the defense, they have a fair number of solid players, and the front 7 is decent, if filled with checkered injury histories. Second-year linebacker Bud Dupree is already on IR and missing for the year. It's the secondary where the problems have existed, and the amount of deep passes allowed by a defence that ranked top 3 for sacks is actually quite astonishing. As I say, the offence will be fine, particularly when Bell is back from suspension. Even though D'Angelo Williams was excellent in relief, both during suspension and injury last year, the defence is the key to this team. They took a big jump in performance last year. Defensive performance often is more variable. It's difficult to sustain, particularly when you make a gain in a big chunk like they did last year. I would be wary of regression. The schedule this year, however, is easier and should counterbalance that effect. The team is certainly involved in the post-season discussion. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump on the Steelers Super Bowl bandwagon yet, but they're certainly there in the conversation. The Cleveland Browns. Oh, Cleveland. I like the hire of Hugh Jackson. I think he's an excellent offensive mind and did outstanding work in Cincinnati the last couple of years. The Browns do appear to have punted this season as they've stockpiled draft picks, traded away almost anything of value while retaining and resigning all valuable reclamation products, save for Johnny Football. We will see the return of Josh Gordon, the man who set the league on fire in 1 year before various drug bans on either side, and the forgotten saviour of Washington football, RG3 at quarterback. This team picked the most players in last year's draft, trading back and stockpiling picks, and have gone super young. There isn't an awful lot to say. At this stage, they're in a huge Chicago Cubs-style rebuilding phase, breaking everything down to the absolute minimum in the hope that the solid draft classes, which will be a novelty in Cleveland, will allow them a future in the not-too-far distance. I like the coaching infrastructure. I'm a fan of Ray Horton, despite the Titans' mess of last year at defensive coordinator, and I think Hugh Jackson will succeed. Hell, the man went 500 in Oakland in his only season as a head coach. He went 8-8 and got canned, for God's sake. This doesn't happen too often, the complete rebuild in the NFL compared to other sports, but Cleveland easily look one of the league's worst team this year. It's almost going to be mitigated within the city, though, because the Cleveland Cavaliers are the NBA champions and the Tribe are contending in Major League Baseball as well. There's always next year, Cleveland. And finally, that brings me to the Cincinnati Bengals. Much like their opposite conference North Division counterparts, the Chicago Bears, the biggest loss for this team will not be a player from the field of play, but their offensive coordinator, Hugh Jackson, who I've just spoken about, who is now in state, in division with Cleveland, heading up their rebuild. Jackson got the best out of Andy Dalton last year and has a reasonably solid history of doing that, with teams somehow managing to get fired after an 8-8 season in Oakland of all places, though this team has been relatively unaffected by assistant coordinator, by past coordinator hires when Jay Gruden went to Washington and Mike Zimmer went to Minnesota. The offensive lineup will be somewhat different to last year, as although Dalton and the tandem of Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill remain in the backfield behind the main receiving threat of AJ Green, the support cast at receiver, Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, have left in free agency. The Bengals have drafted Tyler Boyd in the first round. He should plug straight in alongside free agent Brandon LaFell, who's probably not going to perform to the levels he did with Tom Brady as his quarterback in the not so distant past. Tight end Tyler Eifert will miss the start of this season, at least the first month, after off-season surgery. The defensive unit has long been one of my favourites in Cincinnati, dating back to the Mike Zimmer days. It's usually well disciplined on the execution side of the game, such as good tackling, even if some of the players are, shall we say, head cases and lost the plot in the playoffs, throwing the game against Pittsburgh away. I'm looking at you, Vontaze Burfict and Adam Jones. They dedicate draft resources to keeping the unit young. They draft well, keeping talent levels high. They do not blitz often, but with the destructive force that's Geno Atkins in full effect up the middle, as he was last year, you don't really need to. His health is a large key for the Cincinnati Bengals, and they'll need to keep him healthy again this season. I think this team comes back with a point to prove after that hideous collapse in the playoffs. It will either roar out of the gates, no pun intended, or crumble early. People sleep on the Bengals at their peril, though, as they've been relevant in the Marvin Lewis era more often than not, even if they have yet to win a playoff game in 6 attempts. Maybe this is a year they'll sneak up when people aren't quite looking and everyone's got their eye on the Pittsburgh Steelers. My bets in this division, I can't see Baltimore going above 500. Their over-under win line is set at 8.5. I'm going to play under on Baltimore at 8.5 wins. Looking at Cleveland, I was really struggling to come up with a bet until I found Gary Barnidge to be the top Cleveland touchdown scorer this year, which I think 4-1 is a perfectly reasonable price. I think Isaiah Crowell is the favourite, but I'm not convinced he finishes the season as the running back there. I think they might give Duke Johnson a pretty big look in the position as well. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the over-under is set at 10.5 wins. I was going to play the over, but you just look at it, and down the years, Pittsburgh lose too many silly games that they've got no business losing. And for a team to get to 11 wins in this league, you can't do that. So I'm going to play under 10.5 Pittsburgh wins with Bet Victor. And finally, I'm going to play Cincinnati to win the AFC North. They're the second favourite. Pittsburgh are the favourite to win this, but I like the Bengals. I like what they've got there. I'm hoping that the work that was done with Dalton last year does transfer into this season, despite the loss of coordinator Hugh Jackson to Cleveland. I think that they've probably got more depth than the other teams in the division, and I think that they are probably less top heavy, shall we say, than Pittsburgh, and able to field a good defence and a good offence with depth in behind them. That's my opinion on the AFC North. Let me know in the comments what you think will happen in the AFC North this year. I will be back later on with my outright and special bet show. That will complete my NFL preview. Please do like this video, subscribe to my channel, give me a follow on Twitter at dansportstips. I will be here all season long with regular NFL content, both betting, previews and daily fantasy sports shows. See you later.